Hello, my name is Leslie Kane. I am the host of the Why Not Today podcast. This is a podcast to celebrate people who have been courageous and said, why not today? I started this podcast in honor of my father, Patrick Kane, who often said, why not today? I'm based in Reston, Virginia, a planned community right outside of Washington, D.C., and thanks for joining us today. So my guest today, and I always say I'm excited about my guests, but I am really excited about this guest, is Laura Carney, because I did not know her at all. And I always talk about how we connected, how we met people. And I happened to be in Asheville, North Carolina on Father's Day for a good friend's birthday party. And CBS This Morning came on. My friend had the TV on. I don't ever watch CBS This Morning. And it had a story about Laura and her book, which I've got right here. It's called My Father's List. And I'm going to let her talk all about it. But basically, her father died unexpectedly, very young. And she found his bucket list and started doing it. And it just spoke to me. I read it from cover to cover. So many coincidences and connections. Like the first chapter was swim across a river. And she swam across the French Broad River, which I was in Asheville reading the book. And just in our conversation just now, we already came up with a gazillion other connections, but just so many different connections. And so I read the book this summer, and then I reached out to her. I connected with you, Laura, on social media and was kind of stalking you, watching you. And just one night out of a whim, I'm like, would you be a guest on my podcast? And you said, yes. I'm like, oh, yay. So I'm super excited to hear about you, your book, your courage. I mentioned, been reading the book again, and kind of in different eyes because I lost a close friend this summer, very unexpectedly, kind of like your dad. And so reading it a different way, and it just talks, I pulled it out last night, some of my highlights, and it talks a lot about bravery and courage and doing the things and living your life. And that's really what the Why Not Today podcast is about. And the theme is we got to live our life and say why not today and do the little things. And I think you did that a lot with the bucket list. So I'm really excited to have you on. So Laura, why don't you quickly introduce yourself, a little background of you, and a fun fact about you, and then we'll talk about courage in the book.
Oh, that is quite an introduction. I don't know if I know how to follow that. Thank you so much. I love hearing those stories about somebody, being somewhere on Father's Day and watching that interview and just,
Yeah.
thinking about what just the connections that were happening all over the place, all over the world
And Father's Day, I lost my father 10 years, it would be 11 years in March. And Father's Day is probably the hardest holiday
Mhm.
because, Christmas, you've got all these other things going on, but Father's Day is all about your dad. Everybody's dad and they're celebrating. I purposely hope the day goes by quickly and stay off social media because I don't want to see all the pictures of everybody's dads and
Oh,
doing,
yeah.
it's a hard day. So having you on TV and talking about the book and things, it was just made it a happy day.
Oh, good. Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah, I know that that's true for a lot of people. And that even, it's funny that that interview wasn't even originally supposed to air on Father's Day. It was supposed to be the week before, and then Tina
Wow.
Turner passed away, and so it got pushed. And everyone was like, "Oh, why wasn't this scheduled for Father's Day?" Like
Yeah,
that's
exactly. How
perfect.
perfect.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, that's just that was the nature of my project, I think, too, that I set out to do this bucket list that had 54 unchecked items on it. My dad had written down 60 of them, and he wrote it when he was 29. I'm told soon after I was born, but I don't know quite when. I think he probably added new things throughout the year of 1978. And my mom knew about it, but nobody else knew about it. And I've since learned, since my book came out, I was actually at my book launch. The man who interviewed me on CBS Sunday Morning, Jim Axelrod, he lives right here in my town in Montclair. So he was the person who helped interview me in the bookstore for my book launch. And he asked me where the list was that whole time. And other than in a box in my brother's house, I really didn't know. And my mom told me later that night, oh, didn't you know they found it on your father when he died?
Oh, wow.
So that made me think, oh my gosh, he probably carried this in his wallet. He probably had it with him
All the
every
time.
time I was with him,
Wow.
for the 25 years I knew him.
Wow.
So
All right,
that
so we're going too far forward. We should
are
start with,
we?
oh
Sorry.
yeah, that's okay. This is going to be a fun interview, but let's talk about, just tell us who you are
Oh, sure. Well, I'm a
without the book
journalist.
and who you are.
Yeah, I'm a
And a
journalist.
fun fact.
I'm just outside New York. I'm a copy editor, so that means most of my work, when I'm not writing, most of my work involves, fixing spelling, grammatical mistakes, punctuation. I fix other people's writing. A fun fact about me. Oh my gosh. I'm double jointed,
Okay, that's a cool
which,
fact.
all my fingers and I can do it twice, and it's really weird.
Oh
I don't
wow,
know.
that is cool. My youngest sister has Down syndrome, and her fingers go back, like totally bend
Oh,
back. So
okay,
when
yeah.
she was a little kid, we'd always bend them back.
I bet she loved that.
Yeah, make fun of the kid. So okay, so before we talk about the book and all the things you did with the bucket list and how it came about, what does courage mean to you, Laura?
Uh, I read this quote a few years ago from Brene Brown, and she
Who
said
I
that
love.
courage is a heart word. And I thought that was really fascinating because, of course, I'm a big logo file, big word lover, being a copy editor, and that really struck me that the root of courage is COUR, which means heart in Latin. And to me, having courage means you're choosing to listen to what your heart wants you to do instead of your head.
Love that. I think that's probably one of my favorite. And I love Brene Brown as well.
Yeah,
Follow
she's
her.
great.
And another coincidence connection is I'm definitely a word girl. I've got them all over my house, even on my kitchen. So, all right. So let's get to the book. So your dad had a bucket list. So how'd you find it? And he passed away. Was he 54?
Yeah, he was 54. It was because of a distracted driver. It was a teenager who was lost and made a phone call at a red light. And then, back then, nobody really knew yet, even though the research existed, it wasn't out anywhere yet. And I tried to cover this in the book as broadly as I could, which, I didn't know either. But, it turns out there are certain things you can do while you're driving that are really just, they refer to it as too much of a load. It's too much of a cognitive load. And, when phones became ubiquitous, it just became a thing most people started doing. We didn't really know. We couldn't just plop right in the driver's seat and just continue having our conversation. Like, I've been watching the Gilmore Girls for the first time, and I can't believe how many people like just hop into a car and are holding onto their phone. And it looks
Yeah.
so strange now because most people use Bluetooth or hands-free these days. But the thing that really surprised me when I started being invited to these seminars on safe driving and becoming an activist in that around the time I was about to get married. And that too was a coincidence. It just was because of an article about it that came across my desk one day at Good Housekeeping where I was working because I didn't know what distracted driving was. But the thing that really surprised me was that it's really not about where your hand is. It's just that like having a conversation with someone who isn't there, it just is too much for your brain to also function like at full capacity. So it makes it so basically as you're driving, like let's say you're pulling up to a stop sign and something's sort of coming at you, like your response time is going to be slower. And it's purely because you're having a conversation with someone who
Right.
isn't there. Like it's just that
Ah,
part of your brain can't do both things at once. And a lot of people don't know that, and it creates a lot of problems in people's
yeah.
lives because they don't know it. And sometimes those problems are fatal. And I was meeting a lot of families who had mostly children who had died in these kinds of incidents. And one of the things they talked about a lot when I would go to these seminars was how do you tell your story? And I would sit there feeling like a dork because like that's what I do for a living, like
Right.
I already knew how to tell a story. And I would almost be like silencing myself because I didn't want to sound, like, oh, well, really it should be like this, like they had their way of teaching it. And then it sort of hit me one day, and this was, I think, pretty shortly before my wedding when I was in Chicago at that seminar, it hit me that, oh, maybe there's a reason. Maybe this wasn't just random and meaningless that my dad died this way. Maybe there's a reason I was so dead set on becoming a journalist after he died. Like I had just moved to New York for a college internship, and I wouldn't give up on it. And maybe this type of thing was supposed to happen to a family where someone is a journalist and someone's a
Hmm.
writer, because I didn't know anybody else who was.
Right.
And I thought sometimes it's like I think you encounter a problem in your life and it's like if not me, who? You
Right.
know, and you recognize you're the only person who actually has a chance. Like I felt
No,
like I had a 5% chance of writing a book about this.
yeah. And it's interesting how, we think our life is going this way, and then it has the diversions. And my dad is a perfect example of his life. And as when he passed away, my brother's eulogy was talking about he always had a plan A, B, and C. He the logo of the podcast is an eye patch and a handlebar mustache, because
Oh,
that was his logo, because he had an eye patch and a handlebar mustache. And he got into a major car accident. He grew up in LA, and he got in a car accident the night of the graduation from high school. They were drinking too much, and got in a major car accident and almost died. He was in the hospital, I think, for 6 months or a long
wow.
time. Lost sight of his eye, and he was supposed to play football for USC, I'm pretty sure. And he couldn't because of the car accident. So this is a long time ago. He had a grandfather in Cleveland, and his dad's like, "Why don't you go to Notre Dame?" So they sent him on a train, and he went by himself on a train to Notre Dame. And that's where he went to college. And my mom grew up in South Bend, which is where Notre Dame is. So, just you just never know where that path of life is going to take you, where something so terrible turned out. Like, I
Yeah.
wouldn't be here if it wasn't because of that.
Yeah, if he had never gotten into that accident. Wow,
Yeah.
that's
And
amazing.
it's, with losing fathers, or losing, your dad the way you did, my friend the way, it's like, okay, what can we do to honor their life? And I think you did a great job with that, and make something really bad and something sad, find something good out of it.
Yeah, I don't think I even really knew how badly I needed to do that. When we first discovered the list, that happened because my brother had just moved into his first house, and I was kind of jealous of that, honestly, because it's like, oh, he's my younger brother, and he's growing up faster than me, because we were still in an apartment, and but I thought, I really need to be supportive and celebrate this. That's what my dad would do, and I went up there, and my husband and I were celebrating that he had moved into his first condo that he had bought. And because it was with his fiance, who's really good at sort of like, I call her like the anti-hoarder because she's really good at knowing like what should stay and what should go.
Right.
And she had found the list because my brother had in a box that whole time for 13 years and he hadn't
Wow.
opened the box. And she's like, "What is this?" So he knew that he needed to show it to me so we could figure out what to do with it. And when I first saw it, like I said, I had been getting involved in activism. So I thought, oh, this is great. Like this is a person's life, their dreams. This is, of course, my dad wanted to ride a horse fast or swim the width of a river, and he was so poetic, and he would have written things that way. So as endearing as it was for us to remember that about him, I thought, oh, this is the kind of story they keep trying to teach us, like they're supposed to tell, like tell the person's story, and then that is how you change hearts, because when you change hearts, that has an impact on how you change minds, I think. So that was
Mhm.
my initial instinct that I knew I needed to at least try to do this because it would be activism. But it wasn't until I really got into the throes of pursuing this thing that it hit me what a big commitment this was, how challenging a lot of the items were going to be, and that this was something that really was just going to like, turn me inside out, reach into my heart and heal all of the places that were still wounded from my dad's death, from the trauma of it, from how shocking it was. And
How
I didn't
how
even know
many
it.
years ago did he die?
Well, it was 20 now, but when we found it, it had been 13. But
Okay.
that kind of trauma can stay with you.
Oh, yeah,
And I
absolutely.
think because it was such a formative age with me being 25, that it just sort of made me bitter about life. I mean, I was a New Yorker, so maybe that was part of it.
Mhm.
I don't know, but it was like this rude awakening of, oh, this is how life is. Okay. Because most people are in their 20s, and if they move to a place like New York, it's so exciting, and you sort of feel like you're on top of the world, even though you might be broke and have no real like career prospects.
Right.
And really you're just having a pretty good time. But I was unlike a lot of my peers in that I wasn't there just to have a good time. I really felt like I needed to make something of myself. And I got really focused on that for a while. Luckily, I met my husband that same summer, 3 months before my dad died. He did get to meet him once, and then he died a week later.
Wow.
So that was lucky. And, my husband was a very self-made man. He had gone to art school for a year, and then he just sort of started traveling. Moved to Seattle. I think he lived in Richmond, Virginia at one point. He lived in Wilmington, North Carolina. Wherever a friend was going, he was going to go with that
Wow.
friend, basically, and just take a chance. And he was very, self-educated, and he kind of taught me about what it means to be a lifelong student. Being someone who I find that people who don't have a traditional college education are like that a lot, like they kind of learn to fashion their education themselves. So they're always thirsting for knowledge. They're always finding things to learn about what they're doing. And he's definitely that way. So that was great for me because it was helping me to think outside the box a little bit at a very young age. And I think probably if I hadn't met him when I did, it's probably true that I wouldn't have said yes to a project like doing the list because it was so unusual. It was so non-traditional. And one of the things, that I talk about a lot in the book is how I was so almost stifled by these ideas I had about what my life was supposed to be. Like I was really resisting it when I was starting to do these list items.
Yeah, and yeah, we're supposed to think we're in this box of life. And then it throws us that curveball, and we get to do the different things, and you just never know where it's going to turn out.
Yeah, I mean, when you say why not today, it's like I really did have to start thinking like that. Because
Yeah.
I set up a deadline for myself with the list. I thought, okay, well, the first item says he wanted to live until the year 2020. So that's the year he's going to live until, or at least that's how far his dreams will live. So I thought
Okay.
that makes sense to me. Then I have 4 years to get all of these items done. Of course, then that turned out to not happen either. Because, like I said, with the list, it's like up is down and down is up. So,
Yeah.
what you think it's going to be is always not quite what it's going to be. And then COVID happened. So, then I had to add an extra 2 years to the project.
Right.
But, I feel like 54 items in 6 years is still pretty good.
That's pretty amazing. So, what was your favorite? Is there a favorite?
Oh, I have so many favorites for so many reasons. I like to say that, there's one that I feel like is ongoing, which is make my husband feel happy, healthy, handsome, and young every day of his life, which of course my dad had written for my mom.
Right.
Even just yesterday, I'm thinking to myself, huh, is he feeling all of those things right now? I don't know. Like, am I slacking? And I think that's a really interesting idea because in my experience, people get married and they sort of start to forget how when they first met that person who they fell in love with, they just, all they really cared about was, oh, I just love making this person happy.
Right.
Like I love seeing them smile and how you would just devote yourself selflessly to doing that. And then it's like you're with someone for a while, and then it becomes a relationship, and then it becomes just your life in a lot of ways, and then they're your family, and it's like, oh well, this is my other half. But am I still working on that? Am I
Right.
still trying to make them feel that way? And I think that's how you really keep the love alive in something. So that list item is a great gift for me.
That's awesome.
And
Giving.
then what else? Kind of the opposite of that one, but I guess not really, because I think it shows the strength of my marriage that I was able to even do this. But is visit Vienna, because I ended up doing that by myself for 2 weeks, and we just couldn't afford for both of us to do it. And my
Right.
husband was super jealous, but he also was very supportive, and it felt like he was there because I was calling him every day and every night. But that was just I sometimes feel like the whole list, and I hope this comes across in the book too. The whole thing was leading to that, the whole adventure, all of these different diverse items I'm doing, they're all preparing me for those 2 weeks. Because if I had tried to do it in year one, I couldn't have done it.
Right.
Like I even now think when I was trying to check off own a $200 suit, which in and my harebrained schemes ended up becoming a triathlon suit because that's an easy $200 suit to own.
Yeah.
Just learn how to be a triathlete, no problem. But now I feel like, well, maybe all of that time that I spent out there in the cold, cycling 20 miles at that one night, or running down to the YMCA and then swimming for an hour and then running back home. Like that's really, you have to do that several times a week if you're training for these half Ironman races like I was. And I did it during the pandemic because I sort of had more time and I was trying to fill it. So now I feel like what I was actually doing when I was out there training for those races was getting really good at being by myself,
Mm,
getting to a point where my brain became accustomed to it. And then
right.
that way, when I went to Vienna, it was just like, oh, this is not a big deal. Like being alone is, I think I referred to myself as my own best friend in the book. And that was something, for someone like me who was diagnosed with depression at a young age and was taught, like don't be, I mean, no one came out and said this, but this was the impression I had, like, don't be alone too much because you can't trust your own thoughts and you'll get really lonely and down. Like I really felt that way as a very young person. So to now be someone at 44, well, I'm 45 now, but I was 44 then, who's choosing to be alone and embraces it and loves it. It's like that was a revelation for me.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. And we was talking to a friend about that this morning. We were
Oh,
talking about depression and addiction and the loneliness and how it's, people that are depressed, go in and spend time alone and, we need to
yeah,
be
but
with
not
them.
in a good way.
No, not in a good way. Exactly. No, true. And so, yeah, the loneliness. And so I'm single and never been married and traveled for corporate America for years and did lots of things, lived by myself. And I remember the first time I was supposed to go to the beach with a friend and she backed out. And I'm like, you know what? I can go by myself. Like I live by myself. I travel by myself for business. Why can't I go? And I had the best time. Like I had ice cream for dinner and read a book on a gazebo and I had nobody else's agenda. So it is kind of a fun adventure to do things on
Yeah,
your
I
own.
mean, if you can't enjoy your company, who else is going to enjoy it,
Exactly.
And the other
Yep.
thing now I think that it did for me once I got really good. I mean, I used to be a person who when I was a teenager, the only thing I ever did alone was go to the mall. I remember even doing that in Delaware and thinking, "Oh God, why don't I have any friends who can go to the mall with me today?" Because, I was very popular in high school. Um, but now I think because I pursue things in my life like these triathlons and travel and things like that alone sometimes, and I actually really enjoy it. It has become a defense against my depression, which is a lifelong condition. I take medication for it. I see a therapist, but it's something I'm always going to have. And I think now, if I get into, if something's triggered for me, or if I'm getting into an episode of it, I come out of it a lot faster. And the reason for that is I've gotten really good at talking to myself in my head. I've gotten good at saying, like, just stopping the thoughts and saying to myself, okay, like, what's going on here, Laura? Like, what are you really thinking? Let's put this into words. What's really bothering you? And that's what that comes from. It comes from being in Vienna, walking down the street, and sometimes just saying something out loud that I was thinking if I saw something completely awe-inspiring, and realizing, well, this is weird. This crazy lady's walking down the street and said something to herself. But then I thought, well, I'm speaking English and most people here don't even speak that, so it's okay.
And half the time people have earbuds in and they're talking to somebody, but
Yeah, I think
they're talking to
getting
themselves.
into the practice of talking to yourself, preferably in your inside head, not outside,
Mhm.
is really healthy. It's really good because you're the one who has to take care of you, you
Yep.
know.
It's saying the good things to yourself though. So,
Yeah.
so in writing the book and doing the bucket list, because you said you do suffer from depression, has it helped with that part of your life? Has it helped you be more creative? How has it changed you?
It changed the way I looked at myself, almost completely. And my mom hates this part because I have such an incredible mother, and she was a guidance counselor, for God's sake. Like she did such a great job at helping me to be emotionally intelligent and express myself and be my real self. Um, but when you have depression, it distorts your thoughts. It changes the way, and especially if you're being treated for it as a kid, I think, because I was seeing all these therapists at a very young age
And
when I
you're
was,
old enough that that was not an, I mean, luckily
it wasn't common. No,
it's
yeah.
more accepted now, but then absolutely not.
Yeah, it was not common. And I felt very othered because of it. I remember having to like quit certain activities in school, like basketball or AP English, marching band, because these doctors were telling me, this is too much stress for you, and you really, like, you're gonna have a life where you can't do much. Like, you can't stress yourself out too much, you can't,
Mm.
like, you need to be aware of your limits here because you're not like other people, and I remember one time someone saying you have a disease. Like, just
Wow.
so dramatic. And to tell a 23-year-old that is just like, oh God, like, I'm doomed. And I can laugh about it now, but it really wasn't very funny for me at the time. And I was
No.
on a lot of different medications, and we really were just we're trying to find the answer for why it was that I just couldn't get out of bed sometimes. And I had formed ideas about who I was just based on how I grew up. And, I had a bit of a sheltered existence in the suburbs in Delaware, which, a lot of suburban kids had. And I had a really lovely childhood. It was really nice. Really, I got to keep my innocence, I think, in a lot of ways that some kids don't get to. And my mom and dad orchestrated that very, very carefully. So I know how fortunate I am. But I think there was just something for me about being sort of an intellectual and then also becoming a woman that didn't pair very well. And that's why the way I described it in the book was, it was when I was reading Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique that my brain broke, basically, because it was like, what? Wait, as women, like, we got the vote and then we were sent back to our homes? Like, what is this history? Like,
Yeah.
this doesn't make any sense to me. And uh I just couldn't piece it together. Like, what kind of life am I going to live if the greatest accomplishments I'll ever have are being married and having kids, if that's really what American society sort of expects from me. And I think something in the core of my being, it just didn't match very well with what I was supposed to do.
Right.
And I think that was what it was. At some point, I really got into like an existential depression that took me many years to navigate. But, like you were saying, everything happens for a reason. And if I hadn't had that experience of navigating depression and seeing all these doctors and, getting to a point where I actually had to go to a hospital after my college graduation because I'd been put on way too many of those antidepressants, I would never have moved to New York. I would never have really taken the plunge with magazines. I wouldn't have met my husband who lived across the country. I met him
Right.
online. I
Wow.
wouldn't have been prepared for when my dad died suddenly, and I had to make a choice. Do I go back home to Delaware or do I keep sticking this out? I don't think I would have had the courage to stick it out if I hadn't been in that hospital the year before. Because what that taught me was, well, you know, I think in general, people have this fear of they don't want to lose control. You know, like like
Absolutely.
like they don't want to be the person who has just had a nervous breakdown and now they're being carted off to a hospital or something. Like that, like it's a real what's the right word for it? Reputation, pride. It's like you don't want to be seen that way by other people. So there's a real effort, I think, that people make in their lives of just let's keep it all together, like let's keep my
Yeah.
emotions in check. And the thing is, like, that's not really being alive.
No.
Like, if you're always trying to maintain something and hide something, what's the point? Are you even enjoying your life? And I got to have this incredible blessing, which I feel like it would surprise my mom to hear me describe it this way because it's a painful thing for her that this happened. But
Right.
I got to have this incredible blessing of being in that hospital in Johns Hopkins for a week and seeing, oh, okay, now I've done this thing that everybody's afraid will happen to them. So there's nothing left. There's nothing left for me to be afraid of. And like the world is my oyster now.
That's awesome. And yet it is those things that happen to us and how we react to them, you know? And, you could have hidden from it and that could have been your identity.
Well,
But
and I did hide it for 13
yeah,
years. I mean, that's the thing. Part of why I wrote about my dad's secret life in the book is because I realized how much I identified with that. And here I was 35 years old or 38 years old, finding this bucket list, starting to embark on his dreams that he didn't get to, and recognizing, oh my God, I've become him. Like here I've here I've made all these efforts to be, responsible and steady and not be this like adventurous dreamer the way that he was, or at least like to limit it, to have a
mhm.
creative life but also feel kind of successful with it. I'd really made these efforts to do that. And I think sometimes when we resist becoming our parents, we still become them anyway. And I had become him in the fact that I had these secrets. I had the hospital, I had even my dad's death by then had become like a secret to me because really I was at a point where anything that felt vulnerable to me or othering or different, I would just hide from people because all I wanted was to be accepted and like celebrated for not my accomplishments, but seen as someone who mattered. I think most people feel that way.
Oh,
But
absolutely.
the weirdest part is now I'm living this life where people treat me like things I'm doing matter. And after being on CBS Sunday Morning and having this book out and whatever else, and that stuff started happening for me when I stopped caring about it. Like I was too busy doing my thing. Like I don't care what people think of me anymore.
Because you're passionate about yourself, about what you're doing, and you're living in
Yeah.
alignment with your values. Somebody said that to me the other day.
Oh yeah, that's really important.
And
And that resonates with people.
yeah,
That there's an energy to it that I think that people give off when they're a person who's doing that.
yeah, and like you said, you've never looked for a job; it all came to you. And
Since
exactly,
losing the full time, yeah.
yeah, I've never looked for a job in my life, and it all just kind of got handed to me. And it's who you knew, the connections, and just it's being
Yep.
open to what's there. And so many people just have their life closed off. And I've talked about this lots with the podcast. There's a author, Daniel Pink. I don't know if you're aware
Oh
of
yeah,
him.
yeah, I've heard of him.
And he actually lives close to this. He's my big scary person to interview. Look, one day he will be on this podcast.
Oh,
But
do it.
I've asked once, but he didn't respond. I'm going to keep asking. But he wrote a book about regrets, right about when I started this podcast. And he said, we never regret the things that we do. We often regret the things. No, yeah, we never regret the things we do. And so, like, we got to do those things. And that's kind of the message here is step out of your comfort zone, do those things. Don't stay in that box. And I think that's where my dad's legacy is he was definitely a big thinker and crazy thinker and way ahead of his time thinker. He had a major stroke in 2000 and pretty much was comatose for months. Um,
Oh
People's like,
wow.
oh, he'll never walk. And he actually lived 13 years after he had the stroke before he passed away. But they were bringing a metro in from DC to Northern Virginia. And that was in the works for years and years. And my dad's like, there's going to be intellectual property going over the toll road and all this stuff happening. And he would be talking about this in the hospital. I'm like, oh, he's still not together. Well, these things are coming to fruition, you know, crazy things. He thought outside the box. And he made you think. He asked questions. I had several friends say that they had more conversations with my father than their own father their entire life. And people would come to visit, friends would come to go out or do something, and he would be like, hey, Laura, grab that bag of mulch and spread it, or pick up those leaves. And they do it. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, but he just had that positive attitude, and good things were coming. And I
I
just
love
feel,
that.
yeah, there's so many connections between you and
Yeah, my
your
dad was
dad in
that
the
way. Yep.
story. Yeah, just the positive attitude. And I think you mentioned earlier, just having your dad with you. And so I told you my dad had the logo. So we all got tattoos with his logo.
I love
Um,
that.
right before he passed away, we got him. Um, but my siblings have them, some of my nieces and nephews. But I just feel like if I have a hard thing or a question, he's right here and I can and you've got them in your book in the bucket list, which I just love the whole premise of that. So many cool things.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing too about my dad is, he wasn't perfect. Nobody's perfect,
Oh,
and
absolutely not.
it was important to me that I described every person who's in that book. It was important to me that I describe them as a human being, even if they're like my mom and like, the most saintly human being I know. That is just not reality, that every single interaction with someone is going to be like, oh, they're a saint every time. That's just not life. And I felt like if I was going to share all of my flaws, or not flaws, but challenges that I was overcoming, it was important to me that I showed the reality of people in my life, and my dad in particular, because for a long time, I think I let my fears about certain things about him, whether he was, because he kind of went from job to job, and my mom was the one who was really sort of providing for us financially, even though he would take us out twice a week. I found out eventually she was going to be paying for college. And as a young person, I was resentful of that and I didn't understand it. And, I think it was important that I wrote about those parts of his life too, which, I think troubled him a great deal. I think he felt a lot of shame about it. And I think he probably felt like he didn't get to do everything that he thought he was going to do because he was such a talented person. So I needed to come to terms with that, I think, because the only way I was going to get to a point in my life where I could let myself thrive and be brave enough to take things on that I care about, that I have a chance of being good at and have a chance of helping people because I'm good at it. The only way I could get there was if I could accept that I have these difficulties too, that I have things specific to me or things I might have inherited from my parents, and just get on with it. Let it be. And I think sometimes it's difficult for people to be brave enough to say why not today, to actually live in the moment and do what they want to do, because they've just sort of become, I guess the right word is encumbered by these things that become like a load they're carrying of, look
And
at
the
all of
have
my,
tos and the should be's. And
yeah, it's like I think the focus can become more, am I keeping up with the Joneses, and not, am I just being me? Am I being the person I was built to be? Because I think even our challenges that we have in life, like these unique things that seem like they're only difficult for us, even those are actually gifts, because they're things that we're supposed to work through. And then take that, who was it? Joseph Campbell used to always say, your wound is where your treasure lies.
yeah,
So you're not supposed to avoid that pain. You're not supposed to just not ever look at it and not let anybody else see it. What you're actually supposed to do is just go into that cave and find it and spend some time with it and become friends with it. So that's really, ironically, that's what going after my dad's dreams forced me to do. I had to look at my own nightmares and
yeah.
hold
And
hands
say,
with them.
why not today a lot.
Yeah, well, that's the other part,
Do the
right? I think
things.
it becomes a practice. I
It
think if
absolutely
you're going to
is.
be a person who's, sorry, what'd you say?
I said it absolutely is a
Yeah,
practice. You got to
yeah,
keep doing it and keep doing those brave things. And I talk about here often. It's some people, and luckily this is not the way I'm wired, is getting up in the morning. Some people, like you said, it was hard to get out of bed.
yeah.
Um,
Well, depression will do that to you.
yeah, and so I can say gratefully I've not experienced that. I'm usually bouncing out of bed, but yeah, it's all the things, just having the courage to do, and live your life that you want to. I mean, I left corporate America 24 years ago to pursue a side hustle, and was able to walk away, and everybody's like, you're crazy, what are you going to do for insurance, and why are you doing this, and how can I'm like, if it doesn't work, I'll get another job. And that was 24 years ago, and have not gotten another job yet. And it's being able to be true to who you are. And I think that was what I was modeled with my dad. He always owned his own business, and it wasn't perfect, and it was ups and downs, and it seemed like everything was good. My mom's told me since that it wasn't always good, and it seemed to be always around a birthday that they were short on cash, and how's it going to work? And it always worked out. And it's something you
Yeah.
and I talked about before we even came on, is do the things and the money will follow. And when you're true to yourself.
Well, and courage is a faith journey, I think, right? Like
Absolutely.
I was thinking about yesterday how funny it is to me that if you look at my book, the end papers, and this wasn't a decision I made, although I had the final call on it, of course. The end papers are watermelons.
I was
And that
wondering
was,
about that.
yeah, it's kind of whimsical. And when I first saw it, I was like, oh, this looks like a scrapbook or something, or like an
So what's the
elementary school
goal of,
teacher.
what's the story behind the
Well, the
watermelon?
watermelon, it was a list item, grow a watermelon. And it's
Okay.
actually, it's really at the very heart of the book. It's chapter 8. It's just about dead center in the story, which I sort of love that that happened that way. One of my favorite books of all time is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. And she does this amazing thing, or did this amazing thing, where the way she wrote that book was very layered. So it's sort of like there are 5 different narrators of Frankenstein, and it starts with the creature's experience, which is kind of dead center of the book. And then outside of that is Dr. Frankenstein's experience. And then outside of that is someone he meets on a boat, and outside of that is the aunt who's receiving letters from the guy on the boat. It's like layer upon layer of narration. And I always thought that was such a cool way to tell a story. And I think it probably impacted the way this story is told because that watermelon seems like it should be one of the least significant items on the list, but it's actually the most important one. Even though it was the size of a golf ball, when we grew it. And I think the picture is of me holding it in my hands, like and the hands were just sort of forming the shape of a heart, which at one point the watermelon did become slightly heart-shaped, which I thought was really cool. But it was really important to me because I think it really represents that idea we were just talking about, which is that courage is a practice.
Mhm.
And the things that are going to require courage for people in their lives, it's going to be different depending on the person. So while growing a watermelon might seem like nothing to someone who has a farm or is a gardener and they do things like that all the time, for someone like me living in the city who was rarely home and was, copy editing in an office until late at night and was maybe home on weekends, like that was a big shift for me to have this little thing I had to take care of every day that my husband would water in the morning because he's a morning person and I would water at night. And watermelons require a lot of water. Like that's like more watering than you're ever
Oh,
going to
wow.
give a plant.
Did
That's,
not
that's
know
in,
that.
it's in the title, watermelon.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking it seemed synchronistic to me that I was checking off this list item at the same time as beginning to write my book, because the book to me felt like I was planting seeds in something. And almost like, I mean, I don't have children myself, but I imagine this was sort of what that would feel like too. If you had a child and you had just become pregnant, and it's like you have a seed that's growing and you have to wait. And I remember thinking, like, I wish I had a pot that was made out of glass, because then I could see
Yeah.
what was happening. And I could, because I couldn't see it. And uh I just had to believe, I had to have faith, I had to wait. And that's what I meant when I said that courage is a faith journey, because if you're doing something new that you think that you could fail at, I mean, I really did think that that was going to be the one that was going to do me in, because I just thought I
Oh,
had a
wow.
black thumb or something. And to have it actually work, it really was just, okay, well, you just have to trust that life is going to do what it needs to do to help you. And the Jimmy Carter sermon I experienced, that really helped with that thinking too. But I really had never thought that way before. I never had this concept that I'm not in the world alone, that there's something so much bigger than all of us that really is guiding all of our lives. And if we can just get aligned with it and be like, okay, I agree, I'm cooperating, let's go, it really helps you with that courage.
I love that. And, I do these interviews and I often think when I'm talking to people, it's like, okay, God, you put Laura in my path for a reason for the things you just said that I needed to hear.
Oh,
And
really?
oh, absolutely. Like just trusting the process, the whole podcast and where it's going and what I want to do with it. It's just, yeah, the seeds and growing them. And somebody
Yeah,
said
those
the
are
other
the
day,
scariest things in life, I
yeah,
think.
somebody said the other day, talking about growing a watermelon, like that seems scary for you and you never done it. Now, I've never grown a watermelon, but I do have lots of plants and they grow like weeds and they don't die. But, those things that seem really easy to us that people go, oh my gosh, how did you do that? I'm like, what do you mean? It's so simple. And so those are the places of our genius, and those are the places we need to spend time. The things that, you writing and copywriting, that scares me a lot, but that's not going to be, but you never know when the book might come from this, but, stay in those places that just feed us and give us life and give us energy. And I think we could,
Sorry,
go ahead.
No, you go.
I was going to say, I think we could talk forever, but.
All I was going to say is what I have discovered is that if there's a yearning that's inside of you, even if it's super scary, that yearning is there for a reason.
Yeah. And, this whole podcast and how this came about, I don't know if I shared this, but with you, but I thought about doing a podcast. It was just kind of one of those, maybe I should do a podcast. No idea. A friend of mine did one. I'd been interviewed on a couple. No idea what I want to do. And I remember it like it's yesterday. I was at a friend's house and there's a social media site that had a story and I don't ever look at it. And it just popped up in my feed and it was some man that lived locally and he had an eye patch on because he had some surgery done. And he said every morning he got up and looked in the mirror and thought of his old friend, Pat Kane. And he talked about my dad and things he did. And he said, and we both always said, why not today? And that just stuck to me. And it's interesting. It was September 13th. My dad died in 13. You had a 13 reference just that was how many years ago your dad passed away?
Well, when I found the list, it had been 13 years.
13 years. Okay. Yeah. So it was like all these 13s, but yeah.
Yeah, that was a big number for him too.
Yeah. And it was just one of those things that I'm just like, okay, there's something here. And so I talked to my friend that I talked about the podcast and told her that story. She goes, well, that's the name of your podcast and just do it. Yeah. And I've just done it. And I just feel like there's something bigger and better. And your book just so spoke to me. And I feel like you're my rock star interview, like my favorite person. You are. I'm like, the fact that you said yes, I've told everybody. I was so excited.
Oh, that's so, wow. That's so nice. I don't know what to do with
that. So I feel like I have a new best friend too. Well, we've started doing sponsors for the podcast, and we're gonna end in a second, but I do want to share our sponsor. So as this is going to launch right at the end of 2023, and as we start January, it's going to be the Why Not Today Be Intentional month. And so I do a one word, and I know Laura and you talked about this too, that you do your one word. And the last couple episodes is centered around that. But our sponsor this week is Pinot's Palette. It says, why not unleash your creativity and have a little fun at Pinot's Palette in Herndon, Virginia? Paint and sip while socializing with loved ones and friends and discover your inner artist. No artist ability required. Entertaining artists will guide you step by step from blank canvas to a masterpiece. Why not paint and sip today? So thank you, Pinot's Palette, for being our sponsor. So as we wrap up, Miss Laura, how would you encourage somebody else to say, why not today?
It's funny. I was just thinking about that, what we talked about, my little known fact about me, that I was double jointed. And it just occurred to me, like, maybe that is the secret, is being flexible. I think because I was diagnosed with depression and ADD at a really young age, one of the things I learned was how important it was to be flexible. Knowing that, I might be late to something sometimes, or I might take an extra hour to finish something that I thought was going to take, this amount of time, or, I might, I don't know, get caught up in a conversation for a really long time because I'm hyper focusing. Like, that's just how I function, and that's okay. And when you're that way, you learn to go with it, just to flow with whatever's happening in your environment. And I think now that is a big key to success for people when they're going after something that scares them, because the truth is, taking that first step and saying, why not today? That's just the beginning. I mean, you're really way ahead of everybody else if you can take that first step. But if you actually want to succeed at something that you're afraid of that you're doing, you're going to have to remember that the universe is going to send you curveballs. And usually that's not a bad thing. Like, it's actually a detour, and it's where you're supposed to be headed. But if you try to stay in this fixed mindset of, no, it's not supposed to be like this, then you're not really helping yourself. So it's really just having this very malleable mindset and a willingness to cooperate with like the forces that be that are trying to guide you. And I think you just covered that pretty well when you said you see all these signs
Yeah.
and things pointing you in a certain direction. And I think people who really succeed at something are able to cooperate in that way.
Yeah, and so true. And I think we've talked about it, circled around that subject many times with my dad. His life went this way when it was supposed to go this way.
Yeah, he's
And
guiding you big
and
time.
oh yeah, and he was on several. He traveled a lot for business, and he was on missed several flights that had major accidents or something happen. Like he escaped death so many times. Um, and just when it was his time, and it was his time. And he actually, the day he passed away was his birthday, and he'd gone to the dentist. He talked to several people. He was totally fine. He had lung cancer, but we don't know what killed him. But that night my mom was getting him ready for bed, and his arm was sore, so she gave him some Advil, turned around to put the water down, and he was gone. Like
I
with
mean, I've been
like
thinking about Mark Twain this whole conversation because that's like Mark Twain. He was born and died with Halley's Comet,
oh
and
really?
he predicted it. He's like, yeah, I was born with Halley's Comet, and I'll die when Halley's Comet comes back, and that is exactly what happened.
Wow.
And he was the person who said that quote that you said earlier. It wasn't just Daniel Pink; it was Mark Twain
Okay. Wow.
said, do what, don't regret anything, essentially. I'm
Yeah.
paraphrasing, but do
Hmm.
the thing that you want to do.
Yeah.
And he's one of my big role models. He was one of my dad's. And I mean, talk about someone who accomplished things that were really scary in
I
his
need to go
life.
read some of his stuff. Well, and I know in your book, um, before we close, I did in your um, the very first, it says, strange, isn't it? Each man's life touches so many others' lives. When he isn't around, he leaves an awful hole, doesn't he? And it's from It's a Wonderful Life. And I have on, and I wear a starfish necklace a lot because of the story of the starfish. I don't know if you're aware of that.
No, what's that story?
But and it just talks about how many lives you can touch. You just never know who that one person is. But this guy was walking down the beach and picking up starfish and throwing them in the ocean. And this man came up and he's like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm saving the starfish. She goes, there are thousands out here. How can you make a difference? And he picked one up and he threw it in the ocean and goes, I made a difference with that one. And I just feel like try to live my life that way, that, you don't know what one person you're going to influence by just smiling at them or just saying their name or doing that one thing and being aware of who God's in your surrounding. And I really think with this podcast, and as you said, my dad's here for me, like your dad is. And that just paying attention to watching people on social media. Like I've interviewed several people that I was watching. I'm like, okay, there's a story behind what she's posting. And just with you, like I remember like it was yesterday sitting on my couch and on Instagram, just scrolling and seeing you. And I'm just like, I'm going to ask. The worst thing she can say is no, which is what my dad always taught me, is always ask, because you never know. And I'm so blessed and grateful that you said yes.
Oh,
Um,
so I feel that way
so,
too.
so fun. So I always try to circle back to my dad, and I say, what's the connection to my dad? And people are like, I didn't know your dad. And oh my gosh, so many things that connect. First of all, the connection with your father's list and my father, and they sound like they're probably up in heaven hanging out and having
Oh,
a,
totally.
a
Your dad
crazy
made you
time.
watch my interview for sure.
Yep, exactly. So my dad was a sailor. He swam. Um, what else did I say? Teach a story. He always taught with stories. He definitely thought outside the box. Pope Francis, who I know you were able to communicate with, which um, I'm Catholic, and my dad, right after he died, is when Pope Francis was, I don't want to say put in office, and he was born, I think, the same year my dad was, and my dad's middle name is Francis. So my mom's
Oh,
like, that
wow.
is such a sign. Things you said about your husband, just so much like my dad too.
Oh, really?
Adventurous, take a chance. He traveled, he did things, and I think I do too. It's like, you know what, I'm just going to do the things, because you just never know. We are not promised tomorrow, and we need to live our life and be happy with it. So
Yeah.
what a
Well,
blessing to have
I mean,
you on.
I would say the biggest shift from doing this project and writing this book for me and what I'm still carrying through my life every day now is that life is a gift. I used to be really afraid of life in some ways because of how my dad died, and also what I had been told at a very young age about my own limitations and things that were stressors for me. So it was like, just try to stay in control, just try to not do too much, and try to avoid getting killed by someone on their phone, like, which I was seeing around me all the time. So it was a very fearful way to be living. And really my focus was try to accomplish things so people think you were important. That's really what I wanted to do, because I thought my dad died and he hadn't finished anything. But doing this list forced me to really like live day to day instead of in that sense of, okay, how will I be remembered 50 years from now? So when you start choosing to live day to day because you're so engrossed in what you're doing, everything starts to change, because you're actually, instead of planning for how you're going to be alive someday, when you actually get to a point where you're happy, you're choosing to be alive right now, because you're just going to take whatever you have within you and use it for what you have to do. And that's what I had to start doing if I was going to accomplish this mission. And now it's become like just habit for me, where every day I get to have a chance to feel alive and I get to do something that matters. And that, I think, is just the greatest gift of it, because it's like I'm always thinking about what would my dad feel about getting to be alive? Like, how would he feel about that today? As
Right.
opposed to, like, I don't ever think anymore about, oh, how sad that he died so young, or how sad that this happened to my family. Instead, I look at it as how lucky I was to have him for the amount
Yeah.
of time I did. And
And you
that's the
hear people,
greatest tribute, I think.
yeah, and you hear people who've lost children at very young, and they're like, you know what? I was grateful I had them that period. And that was supposed to be the time. And
Yeah.
my dad always said, because he had this major stroke and he had several health issues after his stroke. And he was like, I'm not done in this world. I've got grandchildren I need to teach. God's got bigger plans for me. And as I said, he lived his life until the minute he died. And even he was diagnosed in October with cancer. And we're like, do you really want to go through chemo? He's like, heck yeah, like whatever I can do. Even though his quality of life wasn't great, he was still going to do the things to be here. And people would ask, how are you? Because I'm on this side of the grass today.
Oh, I love that. I
Yeah.
mean, I feel like it's a little different with kids, because I mean, I'm not a parent myself, so I can't imagine like how difficult that is when
Yeah.
a child dies, and it's so unnatural seeming, and it's like there, because you don't feel like there's ever supposed to go before you do. So, I try to never speak to that, because it's like I can't fathom it.
No.
But I do know that the families that I've met who have had a child die because of a distracted driver are just some of the most special people I've ever known. And really, it's been a blessing for me to get to learn about their kids, because I think of my life sometimes as a tribute to those kids. The daughter, they didn't get to walk down the aisle. The kid who was in journalism school and never got to actually work for a newspaper. It's like my life is a tribute to them too.
Yeah. We just never know. We need to live our
Yeah.
life and live it the best we can. And how could, just like you're doing and I'm doing, be able to have somebody's life that was cut short, or somebody not even cut short. I mean, my dad, yeah, it was short, but he was 77, I think. But still, to be able to give the tribute and to make a difference because of them. And I love one of the things you have as a nonprofit. And
Yep.
that's something
That's
I'm very
next for me.
passionate about is, being able to give back and make a difference. And yeah,
Yeah, I
so
mean, my dad helped me write this book, and there are some passages in that book where I would write it, and I would feel like, oh, I didn't know I could write that. Like something had come through me, and I really think it was him, because he was a writer too. So half of the royalties are going to go to a foundation in his name, and
that's
then I
awesome.
will donate to every person who helped me with the list, to their personal causes, because they helped me with mine. And yeah, I think I think that it's important to do that. It's important to live for something that's bigger than you, and to feel like, those are the happiest people, I think, the ones who are doing something that's way bigger than themselves.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I feel like I am. So grateful for you. And we will share how to find you in the show notes. I'm assuming you can find the book anywhere books are sold.
Yeah.
It's my father's list. I got mine on Amazon and the next day. And um, super excited to have you on here. It was so much fun to get to know you. And I'm going to connect you with a couple people and hopefully get you down here sometime to do a book reading or something around
Yeah.
your
Yeah, I'd
book.
love to do that.
Plan something. So I'll share all Laura's contact information in the show notes. Is there a favorite way for people to get in touch with you?
Oh, you can find me. I'm my father's list on Instagram and Facebook, pretty much everywhere.
Okay.
Or my website's good, by lauracarney.com. You can get the book there. You can also email me through there. So
Okay, perfect. And then you can always find the podcast at whynottodaypodcast.com. And we do have Why Not Today swag, like cups and shirts. And as you start a new year, like encourage yourself daily to remind yourself to say, why not today? So thanks again, Laura. And let's start 2024 strong as you listen to this episode.
yeah, do you
Thanks
have
again.
your word? Did you pick your word?
I've got a few. It hasn't resonated. Do you have yours yet?
Yeah, 2024 is going to be a scary year, I think, because my word is truth.
Ooh, I love that. Yay. Okay, well, we'll leave on that note. So thanks
Yeah.
again, Laura.
Yeah, thank
Bye,
you for
everybody.
having me. This was really cool.
It was. They think, and remember, say, why not today?
Why not today?